You're back here.
Oh,
you just noticed that you're talking.
Is the mic?
It's not up loud enough.
Is the mic on? Can you hear me?
Yes, but it has to be louder.
Okay. So anyway, what I was saying was we want to thank Birmingham Southern Provost Office for providing our lunch, and then our lunch entertainment was organized by Dr. Dawn Shekova there, Barbara, and we thank her for that, and being able to hear from our Birmingham Southern language students, so that you can kind of get a sense of what their programs are like here and see what they're doing on the ground. So I hope that you enjoyed it. It's just another look at what's going on in the state and languages, which is really pretty awesome. When I sit through one of these, I'm always really struck by so many things going on in Alabama in language education and in our classrooms. So what we're going to do now is shift to our second keynote speaker, and I want to introduce you to her. It is Dr. Kristin Davin. She will be talking to us about the history of the field of biliteracy. She's an associate professor and program director of the Foreign Language Education Program at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And her research focuses on language teacher development, language policies related to multilingualism. Her scholarship is informed by her prior work as a Spanish teacher at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. So again, one of the things that we tried to do today was to provide you with speakers who have walked in your shoes, if you will. Dr. Davin is, she's actually very humble. She didn't list 1,000 places that she published her fancy articles. But the reason why I was really interested in getting her to come to Alabama was the fact that she really is, I would say, the #1 researcher on the seal of biliteracy in the United States, which is a really big deal. So I was expecting somebody older. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. We're going to see what she does next. But then as fate should have it, the only publication that she mentioned was the one that I'm holding in my hand, and I just got it. So she has a new book out, and it's available at the ACTFL website, and it's promoting multilingualism in schools, a framework for implementing the seal of biliteracy. So this is right up our alley here. Now, I bought this copy with my own hard-earned money, and I'm going to risk it and pass it around, but I want it back because I haven't read it yet, because as I said, it just came in the mail. But it is available. It's something that it's another tool. So I will definitely make sure in the Google folder link that you will get on Monday, I will have the information about this book if you're interested in ordering it. If your school is oh so flush with cash that they will order it for you, that's even better. So without any further ado, I want to have us welcome Kristin Davin. Out of your way here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's so nice to see you all. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so thankful to our hosts and for the organization for having me here. I will say, when ACTFL heard I was coming to do this talk, they gave me a promo code so that you can get 15% off the book if you want. I'll show that to you at the end. So I thought that was really nice of them, since this is kind of touching on the topics in the book, but a little bit to the side. So, about 7 years ago, I went to a conference in Illinois, and I heard Linda Ignatz talking about the seal of biliteracy, and I thought, what is the seal of biliteracy? And I heard her talk about it, and I left so excited because I was like, this is a game changer. You know, this is such a cool policy. I want to learn everything about it. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 7 years, talking with students, teachers all across the country, trying to find out more about this super cool policies. So I'm going to share a lot of that research with you all today. My talk's in 4 parts. So why it's important, how it varies across states. I'm not going to spend too long there, but I want you to have an idea so that you know. how those differences in the policy across states impact the number and percentage of students who get the seal of biliteracy, and then kind of what we need to think about looking forward. And I'm going to have a quick pause after each part, and I'm going to make you ask me 1 or 2 questions. So please be ready for that so I don't lose too much with wait time. So a little bit of background knowledge, as you may have heard. Here in the United States, only 1 in 5 students is enrolled in world language education and public schooling. Only 1 in 5 states, about 20%, have a world language graduation requirement at the high school level. And only about 10% of English-dominant students are multilingual, so we have a long way to go. And I think this is where the importance of the seal of biliteracy really comes in. So, you know, we have this history of monolingual, English-only ideologies here in this country where we've had all sorts of laws that said, oh, we can't have other language education in school. And the seal of biliteracy is one of the first that has said, yes, like, let's teach our students other languages. We know that how important this is for our students. We know about the benefits of bilingualism, how students, you know, we've got all this research about how they perform better in academic achievement tests when they're bilingual, about it creates more open-minded individuals. It apparently delays the onset of dementia as you get older, so there are all these great benefits, and yet so few of our students have access to learning another language. So the way this came about, in California, it was one of 3 states where they had these English-only laws. It was Proposition 226 that said we can no longer have bilingual education for our students who are labeled as English learners. We don't like that label, but that's what the label was. And so there was this group of advocates who got together, Californians together, and they said, if we can change perceptions around bilingualism and biliteracy, then maybe we can get rid of that law. And instead of, you know, children being embarrassed that they speak a language other than English, we'll get it, you know, they'll be excited. People will recognize this for the asset that it is instead of as a deficit. And so it took them multiple years, and the bill had to go to the governor's desk. I think it was at least 3 times, but eventually it was signed into law. And so then these other states heard about this seal of biliteracy, and they thought, oh, that's cool. I mean, Illinois was one of the first to follow suit. And as you saw in the presentation earlier today, I was deleting some slides during Linda's. Oh no, it was great. The things that were really important, I left because I thought we'll say it twice. But you know, now we have 49 states that have a seal of biliteracy policy in place, including Alabama. And so this is just, yeah, hugely exciting. So you've seen this map, you know that you're on it, so this is great. South Dakota, we're hopefully getting there soon. So a lot of my research over the years has looked at what are the benefits of this policy, right? So we hear it's a great thing, we believe it's a great thing, what do others think about it, what impacts is it actually having? And so it was really interesting in the beginning, and Linda talked about this study a little bit earlier as well, but one thing that fascinated me was when I talked to students and said, you know, why did you get the seal of biliteracy, or how do you feel now that you have it? They said, I finally have proof of my language proficiency. They were worried that people weren't going to believe them when they said they were bilingual and biliterate. So they said, now I have something that's official. So that was something they talked a whole lot about. Increased confidence. This one was shocking to me. Even students who got the seal of biliteracy in a language they spoke at home, they said, oh, now I know I can speak my language. Literally, now I know I can speak my language. You know, that was, and then students who, you know, it wasn't their home language, them too. Oh, I didn't know I could speak Spanish, but I passed the stamp, I passed the apple, and now I know that I can. And this increased confidence changed what they did afterwards because they now knew that they knew this other language. So in a more recent study I did, you know, students said, oh, it motivated me to go to college. It was the first time I was recognized for something, and I thought, oh, maybe I can do college. So it's a lot bigger than just an emblem on the diploma or a notation on the transcript. A lot of students various studies have found this. Alma Castro in California, her work is amazing. She said, a lot of the students said it validated their home language and culture. It made them recognize the sacrifices that their parents had made so that they could, come to the United States and learn English as well. And then, as I mentioned before, motivation to go to college. But this video is one that I found online. Just the students' voices. I always want to try to include their voices as well about what it meant to them. And it's a quick 2 minutes.
They came to this country for a better.
I'm going to go back to the beginning. Here we go.
I decided to pursue the skill of biliteracy because I think it's very important to show kids that you can speak two languages and be proud of where you come from and your culture.
Not only doing it for myself, but for my parents.
I feel like being a part of the Mexican culture, knowing Spanish, is it's very important to me because that's where my family comes from.
They came to this country for me to get better education, and that is what I accomplished.
It's a piece of me that gives me more pride, more confidence in myself.
Language really is what connects you to the rest of the world.
My family speaks Arabic, and I go also speaking Spanish with other classmates and people also in the workplace as well.
And I think especially in our time of technology where we can connect with people from all across the world, it's important to be able to communicate with others around you.
I'm just able, if I go get a job elsewhere, I can communicate with people in my workspace that maybe don't speak English or maybe need help.
Like in our economy, it's getting more of like foreign countries getting together and just having that multiple cultures getting together with one language, it can change so many things.
It feels good to make an accomplishment that not a lot of people could.
It's kind of very relieving to kind of show that on my transcript and everything because I know it's a foot in the door in a sense.
It feels really exciting and satisfying because now you have an actual something to put up on your wall for your achievement in school and out of school.
So I think I'm ready for the next challenge and try another one. So yeah, my father always told me I did better than your grandpa, so you need to do better than me. So I'm just taking the steps to complete it.
Anyway, so you can see from, oh, didn't she do that to me? Okay. So you can see, from these students how excited they are and how meaningful it is to them. And, as Peggy was talking about earlier, the importance of promoting this achievement. Not only is it a way to make the student recognize how awesome this is, but it also lets the other students and the parents and the other faculty in the community know that this exists and that it's a big deal. So, keep going. For districts. So, in the districts in which we've done research, we found that enrollment in their world language programming has increased. The teachers talk about having stronger data on students' proficiency. So, from the example this morning, they might say, oh, my students are scoring really well in writing and speaking, for example, but I can see that we need some more in reading, for example. So the data reports that you get back from these assessments are really valuable in terms of evaluating your language curricula. And that relates to the third one. In one of our studies, some of the teachers talked about, they reported that they were now looking at the successful, actful, can-do statements more. They were using more performance-based assessments in their classroom. The washback on their teaching was just impressive from implementing the seal of biliteracy and giving those assessments. Institutions of higher education, so colleges and universities. This is kind of a newer development with the seal of biliteracy, but I did a research study where I spoke to different places that were awarding credits to students who came to them with the seal of biliteracy, and what they reported to me was that enrollment was actually going up. So beforehand, I had talked to universities and they said, I don't know if I want to do that, if we give them credit for their seal of biliteracy, and they might not take classes in our department anymore. And when we actually talk to them, what happens is they do a retroactive or back credit policy, so the student has to take one class in the department. If they pass that, they get credit for all the courses that would have come before it, and then they're typically almost to a minor. And so they stay on and take more classes because they think, oh, I've got all these credits, I might as well take a couple more and get the minor or stay on for the major. So it makes college more affordable, and it makes college more accessible. So if you think about your students who might not have access to advanced placement or college credit courses because maybe their schedule's dominated by these required English courses, if English is their second language, then this is an opportunity for those students to get college credit as well, which is really important for equity and access. The departments have also said that it helps them with placement, because they told me, sometimes when kids come to us, they try to bomb that placement exam because they want an easy A, and so by having this proficiency level, oh, I'm intermediate mid in this language, then they know exactly what course to put them in. So that's exciting. Right now, I did a Google search maybe 5 months ago, and I was able to locate, just via Google, about 65 or 70 colleges and universities that are giving credit for the seal of biliteracy. But every month I'm seeing on Twitter more and more that are doing it. We just had our first one in North Carolina that started. I haven't heard of any yet in Alabama. I did look this morning, but I think that'll come. So I've created a spreadsheet that I just keep on Google Drive. You'll have this presentation later, but I have a tiny URL, and it lists everyone that I've been able to find that has a policy in place. So, Linda mentioned this earlier as well. In Missouri, they've compiled this list on their website of different companies that are endorsing or recognizing seal of biliteracy. So that's really neat. And then they also have their colleges and universities. So I'm hoping more states follow suit and do something like that. So this is my first pause. Be curious. What's something you're wondering about or a question you have? I want everyone to wonder, but I want 2 people to tell me and share it. Yes?
Where do I find a list of the colleges that you were talking about, that will give credit for seal of biliteracy? Where can we go?
So I created one myself. There's no official one because this is an unfunded movement. Like, it's really hard to find information sometimes. So I've created this tinyurl.com/credit for SoBL. And every time I hear of one, I add onto it. And on that page is my email address. And I tell people, if you know of any that aren't on this list, please email me. I'll add it. So take a look at that. One other question or wondering? Yes?
How long did it take North Carolina to go from having state seal to colleges offering credit?
Oh, that's a good question. I think North Carolina adopted their seal of biliteracy in 2015, and I just heard of the first college university. It was East Carolina. No, it wasn't East Carolina University. It was Pembroke, I think, just did it this year. But, back in 2015, really not many colleges or universities were doing it, so.
I will say I spoke to 2 universities this week, one of which we may be at right now, one of which is not currently in Texas, who said that they are very interested in articulating acceptance.
Because that's what I would like to know. How do we get, now that it's high school level, like, report, how do we get universities to get reports?
Yes. I actually recorded a webinar with Avant Assessment and FLAME, which is the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina. It's on YouTube on the More Learning website for free. And it shares this research, and it might be something. I've been trying to get it out there to IHEs to say, take a look at this, because I think they're afraid of enrollment issues, but it actually helps. So, yeah, we need to apply for some sort of, to bring funding, to bring places together and get everyone on board. Okay, I'm going to keep going. You'll have more opportunities to be curious. So, critiques on the ground. These come from the research, from some of the news outlets. Because you need to be aware of, the benefits and also, some of the potential equity pitfalls. So some research, so Tirillo and his colleagues did a study in California, and they found that because the seal of biliteracy is voluntary, some schools that have people like Peggy and Rhea and Lisa are implementing the seal of biliteracy, and then some schools aren't. And if you think about what schools do you think are the ones that have the resources to implement the seal of biliteracy, right? And so as a result, in that state, English-dominant white students who were enrolled in schools with larger populations because they had more resources and more faculty had greater access to a seal of biliteracy. And when you think about, hey, you can get college credit for this, that's a big deal because that's another, that's another huge source of inequity. So that relates to inequitable access. Also, when you think about the less commonly taught and less commonly tested languages, so a lot of schools start with what they call the low-hanging fruit. And I get that. So if you've never implemented the seal of biliteracy, you're not sure how to do it yet, maybe you want to start with just the students in the AP course, for example. But what we see happen is that the students in the school who speak Tagalog, who speak Hmong, who speak these less commonly taught and tested languages don't have access, and their multilingualism isn't being recognized like their white English-dominant peers. And so that's a huge problem too. So we're really trying to get information out there about how can you implement this seal of biliteracy but make sure that everyone's language is recognized. And that's difficult when it's completely, unfunded at this point. So we're going to come back to these ideas, but just keep those in mind. So your task, as I go through some of these upcoming numbers and things, are you volunteered to get the seal of biliteracy up and running in your school, which I'm sure you're all going to do on Monday. Think about potential equity pitfalls as I discuss the various characteristics of the policy and what steps you might need to take to make sure that all students have access. So how does it vary? And I'm going to go through these quickly, but I have a few articles on this. If you want them, I'll send them to you. States have different names for the recognition or credential, as Linda spoke about earlier. They have different minimum levels of world language proficiency, different levels and requirements for English language proficiency. Some states include private schools in terms of being able to implement and award the seal, and other states do not. So here we have the states that have only one tier. So here in Alabama, we know it's intermediate mid. Some states say, okay, if you get intermediate mid, you get a gold seal, but if you get intermediate high or advanced low, you get a platinum seal. So some of them have different levels, which creates a kind of, okay, this year as a sophomore, maybe I got the silver seal, but maybe next year I'll try for the gold, and maybe after that I'll try for the platinum. So when the seal of biliteracy first started, there just wasn't much guidance out there on how to do this or what it should look like, so everyone kind of created their own. And so now they've started to change over the years as we're getting this research out there, and more states are, kind of converging in terms of their requirements. Required proficiency level, you can see here it ranges anywhere from intermediate low to advanced low. Here in Alabama, we know it's intermediate mid, and that's the most commonly set proficiency level. Evidence of world language proficiency varies. So, like we have here in Alabama, passing score on an approved language assessment, like the stamp or the apple, is the most common form. Some states allow for passing scores on productive skills only. So if you have a language for which you don't have an affordable and practical assessment of reading, writing, listening, and speaking, then in those states, like Washington, for example, you can just demonstrate your proficiency on writing and speaking, and that will count as evidence. And Linda and her colleague have done a study that showed that when students meet the required proficiency level on those two productive skills, they typically meet it on reading and listening also, so it seems like a good measure. Some states have an alternative assessment process, so if there is no affordable and practical assessment in a language spoken by a student, then they can do a portfolio or some other option. That gets tricky, that requires a lot of resources, but some states have that. Provisions for indigenous languages. So in New Mexico, for example, the requirements or the saying, oh, you have to get this score on an assessment to an indigenous tribe is not very culturally responsive, right? And so their requirement is that if the tribal leaders say the person is proficient, it's called certification by indigenous tribe. And so there's not, this external assessment necessarily. Seat time is controversial. There's 6 states where if a student takes through level 4 of a language, then they are deemed proficient or proficient enough to get the seal of biliteracy. And that creates problems because we all know that a student can take through level 4 and not necessarily be at intermediate mid. And also, in my opinion, there's no research to verify this, but North Carolina is one of these states. I think schools are less incentivized to offer language proficiency assessments when they have that in place, because you'll see in the numbers in a minute, they have a lot of students earning the recognition. Alabama here. Students have to attain a minimum score on one of the following assessments, and I'm not going to go into this much because the presenters this afternoon might touch on this. But there are different assessments. You see the stamp up here, you see the apple, you've heard talk about those. Those are the most affordable and practical assessments usually. In terms of English requirements, these vary. Some say you have to pass an English language arts assessment, some say you have to pass the SAT or the ACT with a certain score. Some say minimum GPA in a course of English study. Others say, hey, if you graduate from high school, then you're proficient in English. So that varies. Here in Alabama, there are minimum of 20 on the ACT, or scoring at this particular level on VITA, or you can take the Apple ESL. I like that, because we know that the SAT and the ACT are measuring a lot more than English proficiency, right? So to allow the students to take, so consider that. Keep this in mind when you're thinking about your task. Maybe you have a student who's not going to get a 20 on the ACT, but maybe they'll pass that, Apple English assessment. So think about that, or stamp English assessment. And then also students must complete English language arts graduation requirements and pass the 2.5. So that's, 2 hurdles here in Alabama. Okay. What are you wondering? Yes?
So I teach at a school in Mobile. In grades 6 through 9, we have 3 languages, German, French, and Spanish. Mm-hmm. And we, of course, we don't see the end product of the seal of biliteracy. So, and I think Linda might have had this in her presentation, where along the way there were like ribbons, or I need something to motivate my students to get them on to high school. But before then,
absolutely. So they're called pathway awards in most places. If you Google Massachusetts, they have a big document that explains how to do it. Chicago Public Schools is doing it. Sure, other places are doing it too. But so the thing is, you build the hype around the seal of biliteracy early, and you set kind of benchmarks on the way to proficiency. So, okay, we're going to give this assessment at 8th grade, and if you are at, novice high, then you are on this pathway to proficiency, right? So you just set what your proficiency level, what you want it to be on the way. So that has so many benefits. One, it raises the hype about the program so that more students and their families are aware. So that's huge. 2, that means the students have seen the assessment before, and you don't have to do an official Apple or official stamp if you don't have the funding for it. You could do a different type of assessment that is really like looking at those interpersonal, or excuse me, I always say interpersonal, those modes of communication that's assessing, proficiency or performance toward proficiency. It gives the teachers data too about, how they're doing. So I think it's a great idea. Yes?
The word 4 states that practice.
Okay, so it's North Carolina, California, which I think is why Satiralu got the results that he got earlier, but I haven't written about that. Florida, Colorado. Okay. I think there might be 6. I can tell you later for sure. I've written about that. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Yeah, we're so good on time. Okay, what percentage of graduates in each state receive the seal of biliteracy? So I picked the ones that were interesting to put on this slide instead of all of them. So what I've got here is the year that they adopted the seal. Laser. I put their population of students labeled, by the government as English learners, like that term, because that's interesting to know. Percent of earners back in 2017, 2018, and then the percent of earners in 2018, 2019, and then that growth. Interested to see the data, the most recent data, but it's not out yet. So what we see here, for example, is California's got the biggest number. Again, they started first. They have a huge population of students labeled as English learners. They also have the seat time policy. Illinois is the only state where you saw a negative, and that's because they changed the cutoff score for the ACT, making it more difficult for students to reach. And so they saw a decrease, but still a pretty large percentage compared to other states. And then, let's see, Washington's done really cool things about offering assessments in any language requested by students. North Carolina, we have the seat time policy. So you see that these different requirements are shaping how many students. If you do the math, about 3% of high school graduates in the United States are earning a seal by literacy. So we need that to go way up. So how do those variations compare to the percentage of graduates? So, states that set their minimum and intermediate low, that's North Carolina. They graduate about 4.7 on average students with a seal. Those who set theirs at intermediate mid are a little bit lower. The average is 3.9 and intermediate high is 2.6. So this is exactly what you would expect. The higher level of proficiency you require, the fewer students who are going to reach that level. In terms of accepted world language evidence, seat time states have, a higher percentage of students earning a seal than non-seat time states. Those who have that provision for productive skills, who say, okay, we don't have an assessment of reading and listening in Hmong, but we do have one of writing and speaking, they graduate a higher percentage. And then those that have an alternative evidence protocol for languages for which there's not an assessment also graduate more students with a seal. In terms of the English evidence, those who just say if you graduate, then you're proficient in English, 4.2% of students earning a seal. Those that have a minimum GPA, if we take out the seat time states, then we get 3.8, so it's a little bit lower actually than the graduation requirements. And those that say, okay, you have to get this minimum score on an English language arts, like the ACT or the SAT, it's at 2.3. That doesn't include like the Apple English or the Stamp English. So you see how whatever characteristics you go with, they're going to shape the numbers. You'll see this when I send this to you, but this is just kind of a table of what I've just spoken about. So, what will you be looking out for? Any concerns or questions based on the data I just shared? This happened in class last week. I just paused and said, so what questions? None of my students had questions. I said, are you just so tired? What's going on? They said, we don't know we have questions until we try to do it. And then I'm like, oh, so that's why I get 100 emails on the weekends. Those are teachers. They're busy. I'm going to keep going and give you more time in a little bit for more questions and thoughts. So, other considerations. Flexible forms of evidence for less commonly tested languages. It's something you should consider. The challenge is that you need an individual who is proficient in the other language, but also who is familiar with the proficiency levels, because they have to know, what does intermediate mid in speaking look like? What does intermediate mid in writing look like? So what I'd really like to see is a more coordinated effort across states, where instead of each state and each district and each school having to figure this out on their own, there's some centralized place where they can go to get support with this, right? So that's one thing to think about. Streamlined options to demonstrate English proficiency. What we have in North Carolina, for example, is they were I don't know how this happened, but a student who is labeled as an English learner has double requirements to pass. They have to get the, let's say it's the minimum GPA in a course of study for English, I think, but then they also have to get a certain score on the access test. And so they're having to do two things, whereas their peers are only having to do one thing. And so that's a problem. So I'd like to see streamlined options. I'm very interested in this if you graduate from high school, you're proficient in English. I haven't seen exceptions to that rule here in the United States, so it seems, I don't know, maybe in like full immersion, I don't know. I'm interested in it, we can talk about it later. Greater uniformity in district participation, this is a huge one, but students in every single school should have access to a seal of biliteracy. Now, the Global Seal is offering a really great option for this. So let's say, I've talked to some individuals at institutions of higher ed who say, well, we give credit for seal of biliteracy, but not all of our students had access to that program in high school. So then they give their own assessment, award the Global Seal, and then students can get the college credit through that. But there's an act, it's called the BEST Act, that's being considered at the national level right now. They would provide funding for the seal of biliteracy. I really want to see that pass so that we can implement this. It's because it's good for all of our students. See this implemented more. So, who is the seal of biliteracy for? This is interesting. I always ask my students this in focus groups when I'm doing research. And they always have very different, very interesting answers. The answer is everyone. The seal of biliteracy is for everyone, right? We get into these big debates. Oh, it's for our students who speak English and we want them to learn a second language. Oh, it's for our students who speak other languages and they're no, it's for every student. Every student should get a seal of biliteracy. So I'm going to share two vignettes. These are also, each chapter in the book starts with a vignette about a student. But here, so from the students' voices. So Anna grew up in rural Illinois in a home where only English was spoken. She attended schools in a local public school district and began studying Spanish in 8th grade. Reflecting on her learning, she told us, "I've not been the best Spanish student. Despite her struggles, she loved Spanish and she adored her teacher." And talking about the courses, she explained that the teachers don't just integrate grammar and all that textbook stuff. They bring in culture and they bring in your personal life. Students love to talk about themselves and know this. She elaborated, "I can't tell you how many times we've done a speaking assignment about us or a writing assignment about us, and that really helps you connect with it. And I feel like that's what makes Spanish or learning Spanish so much easier and so much more fun." So as a high school senior in Spanish 4, she took a test of her language proficiency and she told us that she did awful, but she decided to go on to Spanish 5 and take the test again as a senior. And she said, "I got the seal of biliteracy and my senora cried because she was so happy. And it made me cry and I was so happy," she said. And it's just things like passing that test on the second try, you see yourself grow, that really motivates you. Same quote from earlier, yep. So that was me. And then, another student, Neeb, he was born in Thailand to Hmong parents, and he moved to Minnesota as a child. And we talked to him in a focus group shortly after he had taken the seal of biliteracy assessment, but he hadn't gotten his results yet. And he was nervous. And he said that his parents complained that he spoke English too frequently, which caused tension at home. So he hadn't told them about the seal of biliteracy. And so many students told us this, that there was tension at home. Their parents thought that they didn't speak their home language, and so they were going to take this test, get the seal of biliteracy to prove their parents wrong. We followed up with these students a year later after they had graduated from high school, and he excitedly shared that he earned a platinum seal of biliteracy and said that he felt proud of himself. When he had received a letter sharing the accomplishment, he initially hid it from his parents to surprise them at the awards ceremony hosted by the school. So they showed up that night. He described how proud they were when they arrived at the ceremony and learned about his recognition. And he reflected that it was worth coming to school each Saturday and taking seal of biliteracy assessment. And he said that it motivated him to learn more about his own culture, and he thought it would be useful for his international business major. So, you know, the students have such interesting things to say, and a lot of times, even in states where they don't have college credit yet, or even when the kids aren't going to IHEs that offer credit yet, it's still so impactful and so meaningful to them. And to their parents, too. I had this one parent say, oh, my child doesn't get recognitions. What are you talking about? And that just was heartbreaking, right? Because we constantly send this message in schools that we don't care about your home language, we don't care about your home culture, we just want you to learn English. And so this sends the opposite message, and that is so important. So the book that Sherry showed you earlier, I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Amy Heineke, and we outline a 5 Ps framework for implementing the seal with the purpose at the very beginning. So it kind of walks you through steps of getting your policy up and running. We're starting with the purpose. What is your goal for the seal of biliteracy? Who do you want to serve? That sort of thing. And then walks you through some of the nuts and bolts too that Ria was talking about earlier with proficiency assessments. When are you going to offer them? What languages are you going to offer them in? What kind of technology things do you need to think about? So, for example, if you have a student earning a seal of biliteracy in Arabic, you're going to need a keyboard overlay, right? Or something or have the handwritten version of the writing test. So just lots of little nuts and bolts things to think about. Programs, what types of programs need to be present in your school? And what should the characteristics of those programs be to graduate a lot of students with the seal of biliteracy? If your program is mostly translation or, you know, conjugating verbs, that's not going to set students up to do well on these proficiency assessments. Partners who can be involved. So, for example, you know, sometimes these state language organizations are really great resources for helping to host assessments. Sometimes universities have language learning labs you can use. Community language organizations and Saturday schools are great partners. I worked with a Tamil school in Minnesota that was really, you know, gung-ho about the seal of biliteracy, created their own assessment with ACTFL, and was giving that assessment to their students and working with the school districts to make sure they got their recognition. And then promotion. This is so important that so many students have heard seal of biliteracy. I mean, so many teachers, even world language teachers, they don't know what it is yet because I don't know, it takes a long, we have so much information coming in all the time. So just ideas on that and how schools are doing that. And so like I said before, I felt like including this, I was like, this is like a shameless plug for my own book, but it is useful, and ACTFL did give me the 15% off code. So they only said that it's valid for 3 days. So if you are interested or know a colleague that's interested, please pass this along. I will say that I don't like ebooks from ACTFL because you can't just get like a PDF. You have to use their weird app to read it on. But I hate paying shipping, and so I did that last time for a different book, and I've regretted it ever since, so I'll throw that out there. But yeah, if you're interested, that tiny URL just takes you to the ACTFL website. But yeah, so I want to pause there. Well, that's the conclusion of my talk. But I want to give you time for questions, comments, and wonders, because we still have about 7 minutes.
Taking advantage of the 7 minutes, I'm going to grab the mic, and if you need it, I'll hand it to you. But it's great to be in a room full of teachers because they all have a teacher voice. Build it out.
As a pioneer researching all of this about the field of biliteracy, which is really exciting, how do you see the future, like moving forward? What do you think is coming up after, like, you know, more universities start adopting it? Like, as a researcher now, you start listening to it. What do you see in the future?
So what I hope to see is that we get some funding at the federal level for this so that all districts and schools are awarding or are offering the seal of biliteracy to their students. So that's one thing. I want to see all colleges and universities offering credit to students who earn a seal of biliteracy. I want to see something at the national level that, like a database that knows the whole languages of all students and has a database of assessments for all of those languages so that a student who speaks or uses any language has access to getting a seal of biliteracy. It's such a precious resource. And we see so many languages that are being lost around the globe, but we have representatives of so many of those languages living here in our own country. Why aren't we keeping better track of that? And then, you know, like preserving that. So that's something else that I really want to see as well. And that's going to impact language programming in schools. So a lot of times in my work, what I'll find is students who, gosh, it's so hard because students are nervous to take these assessments, especially if they learn their language at home and not in school. I've had students tell me, oh, well, sometimes I don't put my accent marks right, or I'll spell things wrong, and I'm like, that's okay, like you can still earn the seal of biliteracy. You miss an accent mark, that's not a big deal. But they don't realize that, so they need to be informed about the assessment. Or other students who maybe do miss getting the seal by scoring just a little bit low on like reading and writing, for example. So we need programs in schools that promote that. And it doesn't have to be, I know we can't offer a language class in every school for Somali, for Korean, for all these languages that we might have 1 or 2 students, but we can have some sort of period or class where this is an independent study in this classroom, this is where you're going to write in that language, maybe we have computer programs in that language, but we see you, we see your language, we see your culture, we value it, and we want to give you time in school, you know, to develop that. So, so many dreams. Other questions or curiosities?
Mine's kind of a follow-up on that with the languages that we do not offer in our school with our heritage speakers. You know, because a lot of times they do not have literacy in that first language. Have you seen any research or resources or anything to help those students build those skills? Because they may speak it, but they don't read it properly.
You know, that's a good question. And the things that I've heard students tell me about, sometimes their parents don't know that it's important for those to build those skills, but once their parents learn about the seal of biliteracy, they recognize the importance, and then they might make more efforts to get more print resources at home, or teach their children how to write, or find Saturday schools, community organizations. You want to add something to that, Linda?
Yeah, I think one of the best examples I mentioned earlier today was Chicago Public Schools. 2/3 of their seal of biliteracy recipients are current or former English, qualified as English language learners or emerging bilinguals. And what they do is they identify those students, especially at that 5th grade level, how is their English? And if their English is on track, then they start supporting the family in the home language. So here are, some resources to build the literacy, because it oftentimes isn't the speaking, listening, it is the literacy piece. So, they provide them like, here's resources for, electronic, online reading resources or programming, whether it's radio, TV, right to the family at home, those extended pieces. And that's a real useful piece for those kinds of populations, because, and again, partnering with, if there is a heritage program, partner with those programs. They're amazing and they're everywhere in lots of languages you may not even have heard of in your own communities, because, and then just, find ways to create them, and then you won't have to test that language. They can do it for you.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, and even if, let's say they take the apple and they don't get score high enough on the literacy stuff, at least they have that school report on the listening and speaking. And even if they can't put seal of biliteracy on their LinkedIn, they can put, I have documentation of speaking proficiency and listening comprehension in this language. So I mean, that's not nothing.
Yeah. And they can retake just a portion of the assessment. They don't have to take reading, writing, listening, and speaking every time. They can take just the reading again or just the writing again. So that really motivates some students, like, I'm going to go study and I'm going to take this portion again and try to pass that.
I just have a comment. So if you have a student who is just proficient in listening and speaking, and they're actually in the English language, what I'm saying is that they can transfer their skills, the English skills, into their native, like they're only listening, speaking in the Spanish language, or vice versa. You can do, if you have those skills, if you know how to read and write in your own native language, you're going to transfer those skills into the new language or languages.
You know, and we think that they realize that, but sometimes they don't. I remember one male student who said, "Oh, well, I don't read in Spanish." And I said, "Well, do you read in English?" And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "I bet you could figure it out. I think we can work on this." You know, he didn't see that as something that transferred.
Use those cognates, right?
Yeah, exactly. Use those cognates. Got to teach students how to do that too. Yeah.
So if we have students that want to do American Sign Language, what are the options for that test?
Yeah, there's SoBL interview. And so for languages in which a particular domain isn't relevant, then that domain's not required for the seal of biliteracy. So for example, students would not have to write. You know, they just take that assessment where they sign, and that will count as meeting the requirements for the seal of biliteracy.
We have a test coming out at the end of November.
Oh, okay, cool. So on assessment, is it
It's going to be both productive and accepted.
Okay, great.
AIDB does testing for schools. AIDB here in our Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, they do testing for different organizations and that sort of thing. So that there's some resources there as well.
Also, if you're not sure how to reach out to the assessment, I went to our interpreters at the school, our sign language interpreters who work there, and I asked them, and they gave me the person's name and how, they said they were going to set up the test and things like that. So they were a great resource for our kids, whose parents are deaf.
Right. Do you see why I begged her to come all the way from Charlotte? So, I want to thank Kristin Davin. That was an awesome presentation, and it just did so much. I want to invite our panelists, who are really all sitting together back there, to come on up and settle in, and I will happily introduce you. And it's very odd not to see just completely downtown in her booster wear. So